I was 8 when my dad died. Pancreatic cancer. Quick, brutal. One day he was tucking me in with that crooked smile. The next he was a skeleton in a hospital bed, whispering apologies I didn't understand. I still remember the watch on his wrist, an old Omega with a worn leather strap. He always said he'd give it to me when I was a man. Instead, he handed it to me the night before he died. It slid up my forearm like a bracelet, and I wore it every day after that like a shield. My mother was never warm. She wasn't cruel exactly, just cold. She kept the house neat and her voice softer than you'd expect, but I don't think she ever liked being a mom. Dad was the one who knelt down to tie my shoes, who made me pancakes shaped like dinosaurs, who told me stories when I was scared of the dark. Mom watched from the hallway, always watching, never stepping in. When he passed, I thought maybe we'd become closer. It was just the two of us now. I figured maybe grief would melt whatever was frozen in her. But no, she didn't cry at the funeral. She wore black, nodded politely at condolences, and left early. I didn't even ride home with her. My grandmother took me. I kept asking, "Where's Mom?" And Grandma just said she needed space. What kind of mom needs space from her 8-year-old at his father's funeral? 2 weeks later, she introduced me to Jackson. An old friend, she said. I was still sleeping with a nightlight, still waking up crying for my dad. Meanwhile, this tall man with perfect teeth and a fake laugh was suddenly everywhere. He brought her wine and brought me nothing. Not even a hello. He talked like I wasn't in the room. And she laughed at his jokes. I hadn't seen her laugh in months. Soon he was sleeping over. Then he moved in. She didn't ask me if I was okay with it. One day, his shoes were next to the door and his coat was on the hook where Dad's used to hang. I stopped talking much after that. I think part of me was afraid if I spoke too loudly, I'd disappear too. So I held on to Dad's watch and I went quiet. When Jackson tried to get me to call him Jay, I said nothing. When he offered to toss the football, I walked away. Mom noticed, but she didn't care. She started calling me moody. So dramatic, she'd say. Just like his father. One night, I overheard them talking. Jackson said, "He's not going to be a problem, is he?" Mom sighed. "He'll adjust. Or he won't." That was the first night I took the watch off and cried myself to sleep, holding it in my fist like it could bring Dad back. I wanted to believe she was still my mom. But looking back, that was the moment I realized I was alone. And I think she liked it that way. The day of the wedding was the beginning of the end. I was 10 by then. She didn't want me in the photos. Said she'd already done the family shots with Jackson's nieces and nephews like I was some distant cousin, not her son. I wore an old suit that didn't fit, shoes that pinched, and I stood alone at the back of the ceremony while everyone clapped for the couple. At the reception, I sat at the kids' table, but I didn't know any of the kids. I barely touched my food. When I tried to find her during dinner, she waved me off with her champagne glass. "Go play," she said, like I was some dog tugging at her dress hem. The plan was that I'd go stay with Grandma while they went on their honeymoon. But at the last minute, something went wrong. Grandma got sick. So Mom decided I'd just come along for a day or two on their trip. They were taking a luxury train up the coast. I thought maybe, just maybe, this would be our chance to connect. Maybe she'd tuck me in on the sleeper car. Maybe Jackson would ignore me and she'd remember I was her son. That's not what happened. We boarded in the early afternoon. The car smelled like rich leather and expensive perfume. I sat across from them in silence while they sipped wine and laughed. Every time I spoke, Jackson gave me a look like I was a fly buzzing at his ear. An hour in, Mom stood up. "Come with me," she said, grabbing my arm hard enough that her nails bit into my skin. She dragged me through the cars, 1, 2, 3, until we reached the dining car. A group of older women were seated at a table, chatting. She stopped. "This is Alice," she told one of them. "He's traveling alone. His aunt was supposed to meet him, but plans fell through. Would you mind watching him for a bit?" I looked up, confused. "Mom?" She crouched, smiled. This fake smile she always wore for strangers, and whispered in my ear, "Don't follow me." Then she stood, turned, and walked away. I bolted after her, yelling. The women grabbed my arms. She said, "You can't go with her," one of them scolded. I yanked and kicked, and in the struggle, my watch, Dad's watch, caught on one of the chair legs and tore off. I screamed. Not for the watch. Not even for my mother. I screamed because I knew. I knew with the kind of gut-deep certainty that only children understand. She wasn't coming back. I sat there for the rest of the trip, numb and silent, cradling the watch like a wounded bird after one of the women retrieved it. She tried to comfort me. "She must have just needed some time," she said. "She'll come back for you soon." But I already knew. The train arrived in San Francisco the next morning. There was a man waiting in a stiff gray suit holding a sign with my name. Child Services. She had called ahead, filed the paperwork, planned everything. She didn't just leave me behind. She erased me. I don't remember much about the foster home, only that it smelled like soup and bleach, and there were too many locks on the doors. I didn't talk. Not for days. Eventually, someone from the agency called my dad's parents. They lived 2 states away and hadn't even been told my mom was remarrying. I was flown out on a Thursday, escorted by a social worker who kept patting my knee and saying, "You're very brave." My grandmother cried when she saw me. My grandfather didn't say a word, just pulled me into his chest and held me so tight I felt my ribs shift. He smelled like pipe tobacco and Old Spice, exactly like Dad used to. That night, they put me in a room with a night light, fresh sheets, and a box of my dad's old toys they'd kept in the attic. I slept for almost 15 hours. For a while, things were still. Safe. Quiet. Until I overheard a phone call. Grandma was on the landline, speaking in a hushed, angry voice. How could she tell people he died? She said. What kind of mother? I froze in the hallway. My grandfather saw me listening and hung up the receiver gently. Then he knelt down in front of me. Your mother, he said carefully, has told people that you died, that you got lost on the train or wandered off at a station. It's a lie, son. A cruel one. But we know the truth. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I nodded once and went to my room. I stared at the ceiling all night, feeling something in me harden like cement. She hadn't just abandoned me. She'd tried to erase me, to rewrite the story so I never existed. A dead child garners sympathy. A rejected one doesn't. From that night on, I changed. I studied hard, stopped acting out, became polite, quiet, careful. My grandparents didn't understand the shift, but they didn't question it. Grandpa started teaching me about business, savings, and how to recognize a bluff. Power, he told me, is knowing when to hold, when to fold, and when to make the other guy think you don't even have cards. I started following my mother online. She had a new last name, new husband, new life. Her bio said grateful wife, child of God, survivor. I checked her Facebook weekly. She posted old photos of me like I was a memory that had died with my father. Wrote captions like, "My little angel, taken too soon." I almost laughed. There were comments from people saying how brave she was, how tragic her story was. One woman even wrote, "You've been through so much. I don't know how you survived losing both of them." Both of them, me and Dad. Like we were 2 stones she had carried in her pockets and let sink to the bottom of the sea. I stared at the screen and made a promise. One day, she was going to remember that I was alive. And when she did, it wouldn't be on her terms. By the time I was 16, I had already mapped out my mother's entire life. Where she lived, a sprawling house in Connecticut with Jackson. What she did, charity galas, social climbing, a consulting business, that was just branding fluff. What he did, Jackson owned a chain of family-run development firms, all connected under one S-Corp umbrella. From the outside, it looked polished. But when I started digging deeper, the cracks showed. Over-leveraged. Dependent on loans from friends in high places. Sloppy bookkeeping. A few shell companies, one IRS audit away from ruin. I showed my grandfather. He studied the reports I pulled, the public records, the whisper threads from business forums. "You're learning," he said. I didn't tell him the real plan yet. I was still building it. At school, I kept my head down. Got good grades. Took AP economics, accounting, finance. On weekends, Grandpa taught me how to read contracts, dissect balance sheets, and exploit weak hands in poker and in people. In therapy, I didn't talk much about the train, but I did talk about control, about how powerless I'd felt, and how I never wanted to feel that way again. Every milestone I reached, honor roll, SAT scores, scholarships, I funneled into one purpose, building leverage. I went to college out of state under a scholarship funded by an obscure foundation. I made sure my last name wasn't on any public records that could trace back to her. Every digital footprint was scrubbed. She never once reached out. Not on birthdays. Not on holidays. Not even when my grandfather passed away my sophomore year. After the funeral, I found a letter he'd left in his desk drawer, addressed to me. "Don't live your life in the shadow of revenge," it said. "But if you must walk that road, make damn sure you finish what you start." I framed it. That same year, I interned at a private equity firm. Not because I wanted the job, I wanted the playbook. how deals were made, how companies were acquired, restructured, and sometimes ruined. Jackson's businesses were bloated and brittle. All I had to do was lean at the right angle, and the whole thing would crack. By the time I was 24, I'd started my own firm. Quietly, legally, funded through connections I'd made in college and internships. My face wasn't on the website. I operated through proxies, holding companies, and strategic silence. Then I found the perfect opportunity. Jackson's company was seeking capital for an ambitious commercial real estate development. Risky, under-researched. Exactly the kind of project that could swallow them whole. I had one of my firms approach them with a package that looked generous, too generous. But buried in the terms was a clause that would flip control if the project failed to meet benchmarks in the first 6 months. It was bait. He took it. Of course he did. Men like Jackson think they're untouchable. While the deal was being finalized, I also started planting the seeds for part 2. Her. I found old emails, boarding passes, records from that train trip. Hired someone to trace the abandonment filing. Reconstructed the timeline. It was all there, cold, clinical, devastating. I gathered everything. And then I waited for the gala. Their biggest annual event. The place where reputations glowed under chandeliers and lies dripped like champagne. That's where I'd take it all back. The gala was always in May, their anniversary month. I'd been following it for years. Same hotel, same crowd, same nauseating theme of renewal, resilience, and rebirth. I arrived a week early in New York, just to get the final pieces in place. The investment trap had already been triggered. Jackson's development project had hit every hurdle I predicted: zoning delays, contractor walkouts, ballooning costs. The penalty clauses were quietly activating. My firm was gaining control with each missed milestone, but they hadn't noticed yet. That night, I rented a penthouse overlooking the gala venue. I didn't want to just attend. I wanted to arrive with precision. A friend from college, now working in media, owed me a favor. She helped distribute a tip sheet to a handful of gossip columnists, vague but loaded hints about a scandal ready to erupt inside one of the Northeast's most charitable power couples. And I had the payload ready. Photos of me and my mom from childhood, mashed with recent shots to prove identity. Scanned documents showing the Child Services report. Proof she'd filed me as missing, not abandoned. A timeline that made her story collapse. In the watch. It had taken months to repair, the strap was new, but the face was original. I'd worn it every day since college, even though it still carried the scar from that train car. The night of the gala, I wore a tailored black suit, slicked my hair back, and walked in like I belonged. They didn't recognize me. Not right away. Jackson was holding court near the bar, surrounded by sycophants. My mother stood a few feet away, fake laughing with a socialite in sequins. I could see the way she kept glancing over to check on him, the same way you'd check on a spinning plate about to fall. I waited until the auction started, the height of attention, when everyone's cameras were out and the lights were just dim enough to make drama feel cinematic. I approached Jackson first, offered a quiet congratulations, told him I was part of the firm managing his development's oversight. He paled a little. Let's just say I've been watching your moves for a long time. I let that hang for a moment, then stepped away before he could respond. Then I turned toward her. She saw me walking. The way her eyes narrowed, you'd think she was trying to remember where she knew me from, a ghost at a dinner party. Then her eyes dropped to the watch, and she stopped breathing. I didn't say a word. I reached into my pocket, pulled out a single photo, me at age 10, in that ill-fitting suit at her wedding, and held it out. She didn't take it, just stared. Then, finally, she whispered, "It's not possible." "Oh," I said, my voice low, just for her. "It's very possible." I leaned in and added, "Your husband's company is collapsing. By this time next week, I'll own controlling interest. And tomorrow, this." I held up the file folder, "goes public. Your whole life? Build on lies. Let's see how resilient you really are." She reached out to grab my wrist, and I pulled back before she could touch the watch. "Don't," I warned. Someone snapped a photo. She tried to smile for the cameras, but her face was cracked wide open. Jackson appeared beside her a minute later, demanding to know what was going on. I was already walking away. I delivered the bomb. Now I just had to watch it go off. I didn't sleep that night. I didn't need to. I spent the early hours watching the fallout unfold in real time, posts being deleted, photos untagged, frantic calls that went straight to voicemail. I saw a journalist I'd tipped teasing a major expose coming soon. The whispers had started. By morning, the story was everywhere in their circles. Power couple's tragic past called into question. Socialite built brand on dead son, who may be very much alive. Business empire faces investigation after anonymous insider leak. Jackson's face was plastered on finance blogs. My mother's on gossip sites. Her curated image of strength and survival was unraveling, pixel by pixel. And in every article, every thread, there was the same name listed in the documents, mine. I didn't hide anymore. By midday, Jackson's attorney called my firm in a panic. He'd finally read the fine print, realized control was shifting fast. And I wasn't interested in renegotiating. I wanted the company, not to run it, not to grow it, to gut it. I spent the rest of the week finalizing my move into the board. Jackson tried everything, calls, threats, even a personal letter begging for a private discussion. I ignored them all. But my mother? She showed up. She found my office somehow, walked right in, wearing oversized sunglasses like she could still hide from everything. The receptionist tried to stop her, but I told them to let her through. She stood in front of my desk like a defendant at sentencing. You made your point, she said. So what do you want? I didn't offer her a seat. I want 3 things, I said. First, I want Dad's belongings. All of them. Photos, letters, the watch box. Everything you stuffed in a drawer and pretended never existed. Her jaw clenched. Second, I want a public statement. Admitting the truth. No misunderstandings. No miscommunication. Full admission. You abandoned me on a train and told people I died. You don't get to spin it. And third, she asked, her voice cracking. I smiled, not kindly. $1 million. Not for me. For a foundation in Dad's name. Focused on grief counseling for kids. You're going to donate it at the next gala you throw, if anyone ever invites you to another one. She stared at me, eyes glistening. You think this makes you better than me? She whispered. I stood and leaned in close. No. It makes me free from you. She walked out without another word. Later that night, she posted the statement. It was short, blunt, and for once true. I lied. I abandoned my son. I told people he was dead. He is not. And I am ashamed. The comments section tore her apart. Sponsors pulled out. Speaking engagements disappeared. Her resilience brand was finished. Jackson's company, meanwhile, bled clients. Once the truth came out, the partners fled. I let the board fire him before I sold off everything for scraps. I didn't keep a dime. I just wanted the wreckage. In the weeks after the gala, my inbox flooded. Emails from journalists, lawyers, even extended family I hadn't heard from in over a decade. A few wanted interviews. Some apologized. Others just asked if I was really him. I ignored most of them, but I read every email from her. The first one was angry, accusatory. You humiliated me. The second was pathetic. I didn't know how to be a mother. By the fifth, she was sending links to therapy articles and asking if we could talk. I never replied. Instead, I took a trip, alone, to the cemetery where Dad was buried. I hadn't been in years. I brought the Omega watch, now with a new strap, and sat beside the headstone in silence. I told him everything. About the train. About the years with Grandpa. About the night I watched her face collapse under the weight of truth. Then I pulled a photo from my coat, the one of us together at that wedding, when I was 10, and slipped it beneath the watch in a small box I left at the grave. I kept my promise, I said. She remembers. After that, something shifted. Not relief. Not happiness. Just stillness. Like I'd been sprinting underwater for years and had finally broken the surface. Back home, I officially resigned from the board of what used to be Jackson's empire. The final sale went through quietly to a firm I trusted. I wanted nothing from their world. The foundation I started in my father's name took off faster than I expected. A few investors I'd worked with offered to help expand it. Counseling services. Legal aid for abandoned minors. Real help. At the launch event, I stood in front of a crowd and told the truth, not just mine, but the truth of every kid who'd been discarded like a broken toy. I never mentioned her name. I didn't need to. A few months later, I got a final letter from her. No return address. Just a thin envelope with 4 sentences. You won. I'm sorry. I hope someday you can forgive me. But I won't ask you to. I burned it. Because I didn't want revenge anymore. I wanted peace. And peace, I learned, comes not when the past is fixed, but when it can no longer hurt you. I've rebuilt my life without her. I no longer check her social media. I don't look for updates about Jackson. They're part of a story I survived, not a story I'm still living. And some nights, when I roll up my sleeves before bed, I glance down at the face of my father's old watch. It doesn't feel like a wound anymore. It feels like a beginning.